Yoso Bhagava Alahang Sama Sambuddho Sawakato Yena Bhagavata Dhammo Supatipanno Yasa Bhagavato Sawaka Sangho Tamayang Bhagavantang Sadhamang Sasangang Ime Hisakare Hiyatarahang Aropite Hiyabhipujayama Sadhuno Bante Bhagava Suchira Parinipotopi Pachima Janata Nukampamanasa Ime Sakare Dugata Panakala Bhute Patikan Hatu Amhakang Dikharatang Hitaya Sukhaya Alahang Sama Sambuddho Bhagava Buddhang Bhagavantang Abhivademi Sawakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammang Namasami Supatipanno Bhagavato Sawaka Sangho Sanghang Namami Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Sama Buddhassa Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Sama Sambuddhassa Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Sama Sambuddhassa Iti piso Bhagava Arahang Sama Sambuddho Vija Charana Sampanno Sugato Lokavidu Anuttaro Purisa Dhammasarati Sata Deva Manu Sanang Buddho Bhagava Tamahang Bhagavantang Abhipujayami Tamahang Bhagavantang Sirasa Namami Suwakato Bhagavata Dhammo Sanditiko Akaliko Ehipasiko Opanayiko Pachatang Veditapo Vinyuhi Tamahang Dhammang Abhipujayami Tamahang Dhammang Sirasa Namami Supatipanno Bhagavato Sāvaka Sangho Ujjapatipanno Bhagavato Sāvaka Sangho Yaya Patipanno Bhagavato Sāvaka Sangho Samichi Patipanno Bhagavato Sāvaka Sangho Yatitang Chattari Purisa Yugani Ata Purisa Pugala Esa Bhagavato Sāvaka Sangho Ahuneyo Pahuneyo Dakineyo Anjali Karanyo Anuttarang Punya Ketang Lokasa Tamahang Sanghang Abhipujayami Tamahang Sanghang Sirasa Namami. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, not busy with duties, and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm, and wise and skillful, not proud and demanding in nature. Let him not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove, wishing in gladness and in safety. May all beings be happy, whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born. May all beings be happy. Let none deceive another, or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another, even as the mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings, radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding, by not holding to false views. The pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, being free from all sense desires, is not born again into this world. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Very good. The questions. So maybe for a change I can pass the questions down there. No, I can't. So the first question, once everybody's sitting comfortably. Yeah. That's a nice question. The first one. Dear Ajahn, how to improve sila, that's the virtue, beyond keeping the precepts? And of course the answer just with metta, with kindness. And in the Eightfold Path, just before you develop the precept, 3 factors of right speech, action, right livelihood, before then you have this wonderful right motivation, which is basically make peace, be kind, and be gentle. And that actually reinforces just the virtue, because it's coming from the right place. Why are people virtuous? It's not to get brownie points. Look how virtuous I am. We have, who's more virtuous, the monks or the nuns? That's not the point, is it? What's really the point is, why are you practicing virtue? What's the point of it? And you practice virtue through like restraint. You see, I was saying the other day with that story of that Chinese girl who was just mown down in Gosnells by a drunk driver. You can see just why things like alcohol is virtuous. Sorry, alcohol, not drinking alcohol is virtuous. No punishment. No punishment is also virtuous. So little by little we understand just what sila is. It's not harming. And it's not just keeping the precepts, but it is allowing yourself to break precepts. And learning and forgiving yourself. How many monks here have never broken a precept in your life? How many nuns have never broken a precept? How many Ajahns? No, let's not go there. There's a certain amount of, like, sometimes people think the precept's just keeping them is all you need to do. And it's the story I tell about someone who deliberately broke a precept, not a monk or a nun, but there was a gentleman many years ago, and he was a Buddhist, and he was in the Royal Navy before, on his journeys, to many, many different ports. He really liked the city of Perth. So when he retired and got a small house and lived here with his wife. He had children as well. And then it came the time, towards his old age, he started getting sick and he had lung cancer. And I remember going to visit him in the hospital in Royal Perth. He was about to have a heart bypass operation. and had to just wait for a while until there was an opportunity to get that operation, until he was fit enough or strong enough. So when I went to see him, he was in one of these wards with 3 other men. 4 men to this little ward where he could sleep at night. These days, I've never seen that. Every person seems to have their own little private room these days, even in the public hospitals. But anyway, when he had 3 other men in the room, never met them before, and they're going to have the same operation, and a lot of the day they're just talking to one another, they became friends, and he got very close to one of the other men in the room who was about to have the same operation. In fact, his friend had that operation, the bypass surgery, the very day before Don. That was this guy's name. Before Don was about to have his surgery. I think I went to see him the day before. No, I didn't. A couple of days before. But the day before the day before his operation, in the evening, at the tea time over in Heiji Monastery, his wife called me up, Don's wife, and he said, is something gone wrong with your husband? He said, no, nothing wrong with my husband, with me. And she said she'd been married to this man for about 40 years. And she said the first time in her life, she'd lied to him. I said, why? She said, well, when I went to visit him, the night before or the afternoon before his operation, he asked me, let's call this his friend Jack. He said, well, how did Jack do in his operation? And I lied. I said, oh, he's fine. He's in the ICU recovering. And I lied because on the way in, I saw Jack's relatives all crying and moaning because he had died on the operating table. Jack had died from the operation, the same operation which Don was going to take the next day. I couldn't bring myself to tell him the truth because I thought that would scare him and give him anxiety, and that might be just enough to tip him over into death, my husband. And when I heard that, and actually what happened next, Don, he was quite old, and he almost succumbed to that operation. He almost died too. There were complications afterwards, but Don managed to pull through. And from that time on, as I told Don's wife, I said, well, I can understand that why you lied to your husband to save his life. And I said to him, and I've used that example many times. It was probably the right thing to do, not to worry your husband at the time, because that could have just killed him, and it might have done. So when people ask me, well, Ajahn Brahm, aren't you just opening a sort of like a crack in the down wall, and people won't keep their precepts anymore? I said, no. Each one of you who keep sort of 5 precepts, you can break one of them once every 40 years. So, and the example is, again, that it's the same, that it's against the law to drive a car speeding and go through a red light, isn't it? Except if Ajahn Brahm has a heart attack because somebody actually laughs at his jokes, and I get surprised. If I have a heart attack and you put me in your car and you come to a red traffic light, what would you do? You'd actually slow down, have a look, and if it was safe, you'd go through. No one would be breaking the law at all, because there were some things which are more important than actually stopping the red traffic lights, and saving somebody's life is one of those things. So we keep our precepts and virtue in perspective. Why are we doing these things? And a lot of times it's a sense of responsibility and compassion and kindness. Wisdom and kindness. And that's really where all these precepts come from anyway. For sometimes people They say, oh, keeping precepts in Buddhism is just so hard, and sometimes there's so many to remember. And please excuse me, but we have the 5 precepts and we have the 8 precepts. And I went to one temple one day and I found they had introduced the 13 precepts. I didn't know what those 13, I never heard it. And all my life as a Buddhist, I never heard of the 13 precepts. What are those? I said, oh, it's like a holy day, like a Wesak or some important ceremony. So we take the 8 precepts in the morning, and just after 12 noon, we take the 5 precepts. That's 13 precepts. That's not right, that's sneaky. Because one of the most important rules in the 8 precepts is not to eat in the afternoon. So just keeping the 8 precepts in the morning is a bit sneaky. And that's not the purpose of the precepts, it's just to get around and well, why are they there? For your simplicity, kindness, trust, safety, so you feel free. So that's actually how you improve your sila, by learning wisdom and compassion. And then you understand why those precepts are there and how to practice them. Dear Ajahn, is it true that you tend to get reborn in the same family or geographical location? Sometimes it's the case, especially even if you are just married. And I told this gentleman, he's a Westerner, he's married to a Thai girl. And I said that, usually you can see in that tradition, sometimes they offer anything to the monks, like the food, then they hold the thing together and say, offering the food, and here you are for the monks. And I told him, as soon as his wife asked him to also hold the thing they were offering together, so they could do it as a joint offering. And as soon as I said, in the Thai tradition, that means that you'll be married to your wife in your next life, he took his hands away straight away. He did. And sometimes, he didn't say this, but other men have said, darling, when I married you, didn't I tell you, till death us do part? Death, okay, we're parting. But no, sometimes you can get reborn in the same family, especially have a wonderful time together. And sometimes in the same geographical location, because you feel comfortable there. But not always. And it's those rebirths when you're not in the same family, and also it's not the same even race. That's where it gets really interesting. Where you get someone whose parents are both Sri Lankan, but they like to eat Chinese food. Where did that one come from? It's obviously because a Chinese person in a previous life got reborn there. So those anomalies, they're the really interesting ones, because they give you lots of confidence about rebirth. But the other one I like to say about rebirth, the same family or geographical location, but often the people come with the same talents and inclinations. And that's important, because sometimes the question, I'm not sure if it's further in here, or often people ask this question at retreats, is, look, if I don't become a stream winner, I don't know in my next birth will I even be a Buddhist. What should I do? Because they like Buddhism, they just want to actually carry on their practice in their next life. So I'm afraid I might not have that opportunity. But this story actually demonstrates that you do incline to the same things which you were really interested in your previous life. And many of you have heard me tell the story before about a British comedian called Roy Hudd, H-U-D-D. And I do remember seeing him on the TV when I was young. He was a household name, he was very famous. But he never actually, I think he did try to go to the United States and increase his popularity there, but he didn't really get off that well in the United States, but he's certainly well known in UK. And I also remember listening to this story. It was actually printed in one of the magazines. The one evening that he'd he was performing in some play in the West End, and as he was driving home from the theatre back home, that was a day when the London government had introduced a one-way system in the capital city. And it was lots of people, including him, got terribly lost. He couldn't go his normal way home. As he was getting lost, he was turning this way and that way, and he turned down a street which he'd never been into in this life. I mentioned in this life, because it was one of those experiences when all the goosebumps came up and the hair stood up on his neck, because he could remember that this was the street he lived in his previous life. And all these memories just came flooding back. It was one of the reasons why, because in a city like London, the outside of the houses stays pretty much the same. When you renovate, you can renovate whatever you want to do, almost inside, but the outside facade is usually sort of pretty constant. So he could remember the house where he lived before. And even there was one of these blue circular plaques on the house, because if you've been to London, they have this, mostly for tourists, they have this tradition. If somebody famous lived in that house, like Winston Churchill or Guy Fawkes or something, I don't know, they put a little circular plaque on the house and say, so-and-so lived here. And of course, you get used to that living in London. They're all over the place. Anyone famous who did something either notorious or just really wonderful, you can see that plaque on the houses. I had a plaque on this house. Because in his previous life, this comedian, he was probably the most famous music hall entertainer in the sort of Edwardian era in England, 1910 or 12 or something. And his name was Dan Leno, D-A-N-L-E-N-O. So apparently, all his memories came back. He was Dan Leno before. And I remember the article that he knocked on the door of their house, and of course, they recognized him. Well, he had, because he was a TV personality. What are you doing here? He said, I used to live here. And no, you didn't. We've lived here for 30 years. You never lived here. And then he explained the whole story. I was Dan Leno before. And because he was well known, they took him seriously, and he took them in, they invited him in, and he showed them the few renovations which they had done. And it's all matched perfectly. And he wrote an article about that. But what happened next was a bit sad. That he wrote the article, with all the information he had and about how he knew he was that man in a previous life. And that was basically the end of his career. Because he was contracted to, I think, one of the TV channels. And the head of that TV channel was a very devout Catholic Christian. He said, I don't want any of these crazy people in my network. And basically stopped his career. But it didn't matter, because he still got jobs in places, he was very talented. But also he became the expert. He wrote many books on the life of Dan Leno. And he's noted, everyone knows he's the expert on the life of that famous music hall entertainer. And the reason I tell that story was because he was a music hall entertainer in his previous life. And after getting reborn, he became a comedian in this life. And very well known, the names were all quite clear. Fascinating. So yeah, you don't just tend to get reborn into the same family. Sometimes you do if you've got a lot of attraction there. The same country, often. But often it's the same sort of inclinations you had before. Comedian in past life, comedian in this life. So who do you think I was in the past? Do you think I was a comedian in my previous life? Honestly, that when I did give a talk once in Melbourne, this young man came up to me afterwards, and apparently he did appear on TV, on one of the comic programs, And he came up to me after listening to me and he said, Ajahn Brahm, you know, that you're very funny. You've got a talent. This is what he said. He said, I can get you a job in, I think, the Melbourne Comedy Club. He said, your material is unique, your timing is excellent, you can make it. And I was really quite chuffed, I think the word is. Yeah, you know, quite sort of happy that I've been offered a job as a stand-up comedian. Yay! But I said, no, I prefer my day job as a monk. I'm just curious, how many of the monks are vegetarians at your monastery, and how do you see it affects their practice compared to meat eaters? I really don't see much of a difference, to be honest with you. And you know, we have that opportunity for both cuisines at Bodhinyana Monastery. Because there's monks from many different backgrounds, monks from many different lands, and some have, in their life, they've developed a preference for this type of food and that type of food. We try and offer that possibility for all of them there. And sometimes that when I reflect back on the occasion when the Buddha's cousin, Devadatta, he asked the Buddha, why don't we all become vegetarian and make that one of the rules for the Sangha? And the Buddha said no. And often wondered why. Why the Buddha refused making that compulsory for all monks. Of course, later I found out that in some places in the world there was no vegetarian food. And I already mentioned the stories of frog on rice. And that was a very poor place. Other places, more wealthy, but still some people will become a monk or a nun if they could get some fish or meat or chicken or something, but they wouldn't become a monk if they didn't get that. And they wouldn't be able to survive without it. So we try and make, like many things in Buddhism, not compulsory, but an optional, whatever the monk feels more comfortable with. It's not just physical comfort either. I remember seeing a documentary about one of the strictest monasteries in Japan, a Heiji Monastery. It was founded by Dogen, a very famous Zen teacher. And there it was very, very strict. Of course, much, much, much stricter than Bodhinyana Monastery. When you had a bath, it wasn't really a bath, just washing your face. It was ice cold water. And you had to work really hard. And then when you were meditating, the guy came behind you with a stick and whacked you if you were nodding. Sometimes when I open my eyes, I think, my goodness, how many of you will be whacked if this is Zen monastery? But then, just afterwards, they said about their kitchen. Said the kitchen, this was all very harsh, but the food, they said, has to be delicious. And I thought, this is weird. Everything else was just so austere. They said, not the food. And having eaten so many different diets in my life, from many different places, because when I travel, this is a story. I know people said that, I think they asked Ajahn Brahmali, because if they ask me, sometimes I don't say what I like. So I asked Ajahn Brahmali, and he said, oh, you like English food. So I remember going to the United States, but I was being looked after by a Sri Lankan group. And so they gave me like Sri Lankan curry, which is really hot and just, it's very hard for me to digest because there's the chili in it. So one day they gave me like a shepherd's pie. And I thought, wow, I could eat this. And just had the potatoes on the top, but because in those sorts of pies you don't know what's underneath. And so I put a big spoon of it in my bowl, and I found out it was Sri Lankan curry underneath. Oh, that was just such a surprise. So your personal experience. There's that free choice there for you. We're not going to force anything on you. And that's like typical of that Buddhism. Okay. Well, all the Thai arahats seem to have undergone tremendous suffering on the way to awakening. Did they? I knew many of those monks. They didn't have tremendous suffering. But sometimes what they do to their disciples, it's called hagiography. They just exaggerate that suffering. And they make it really like it's very, very, very tough. And there wasn't that much suffering. Of course, they had to eat rice and frogs and other stuff, but that's actually what they liked. That's what they ate when they were at home. So there was that usual diet. It was only really, really, really suffering for Westerners. Actually, also for people from central Thailand. When you go down to your visas, the central Thai monks don't want to go up there because they didn't like the food either. Of course, the food is different in different parts of Thailand. And they were really impressed that Westerners could actually manage it. So anyway, the Thai arahats have undergone tremendous suffering. I'm not really quite sure if that's true. There's many, many different ones of those monks. And they're, of course, unusual suffering in life. Is suffering a required condition for enlightenment? No. Again, this is a type of myth. We always think no pain, no gain. And it totally ignores the first teaching of the Buddha. The Buddha went, the Siddhartha Gautama, 6 years of a lot of suffering. And he didn't get anywhere. And the first teaching said, don't do that. Keep that middle way. That personal suffering, I think you're going to get anywhere. That's more like Jain tradition. But the Buddhist tradition is different. We have this middle way to avoid physical distress, which exhausts you, and to actually to develop the happinesses of the mind. Not the sense desires of the five senses. To avoid sensory desire, or we should really call it five sense desire, and to avoid that physical suffering. And that became a special thing about the Buddha. And of course, part of that is also reinforced by the fact that as soon as the Buddha stopped all those harsh practices, his first 5 friends became the first 5 disciples. They just abandoned him. They thought he'd given up the practice. He wasn't really doing anything anymore. But the Buddha had the confidence to make sure he had a very healthy body and mind, especially body, and then sat under the Bodhi tree, which must have been very, very comfortable in those days, and meditate. After having a really great food, the milk rice, which in those days was made for a heavenly being, and became enlightened. And that's the first thing he's taught. He said, look, take that middle path. Don't go to extremes of self-torture. That's one of the reasons why the Thai arahats as well, the Thai teachers, that they sometimes, their disciples, emphasize how much suffering they went through. But that was only because they didn't understand the path. It's much more inspiring to see the great joy they went through, a great sense of peace and inspiration. So suffering is not a required condition for enlightenment. What amount of dukkha is the optimal ratio for pressing the big letting go button? It's sort of, you press the letting go button to abandon dukkha. And so once you understand what suffering is, it's easy to let go. So the question is not properly formulated because dukkha is not a requisite, a prerequisite for enlightenment. Dear Ajahn, thank you so much for all the teachings. Could you please talk about balancing right effort to maintain mindfulness of breath versus too much willpower versus letting mind wander off? It's a tough balancing act for me, thank you. That was a question which always interested me and could never really answer for years. Right effort and letting go. Because the right effort, samma vayama, that was the usual translation, right effort, was the sixth factor of the Eightfold Path. And whenever I put forth effort, it never really worked. Sometimes when I had sloth and torpor, really dull, I put forth effort, come on Ajahn Brahm. And I did have willpower. And anybody who actually, in those early days, see me building work, you can see just my willpower was very, very strong. And even eating rice and frogs, you need quite a lot of willpower to do that. And sitting up all night in Thailand and bearing with mozzies. So there's a lot of willpower involved there. But the willpower never really worked. It made you tense and tired afterwards. And I've already mentioned to you, the first time I went to Malaysia to teach, I was stunned that people were complaining about samadhi headache. Samadhi headache? You do meditation to overcome the pains, not to actually get more. What the heck are you doing? There was just too much willpower they were using, trying to get deep meditation, trying to get enlightenment. So instead of willpower, especially the sixth factor of the Eightfold Path, it is, if you look at the four right vayamas, it's all about restraining unwholesome states of mind and just making sure they don't come up to begin with, and developing good states of mind and keeping those good states of mind. How you do that is not through willpower, it's through basically letting go. Being kind, being gentle. Their unwholesome states of body and unwholesome states of mind disappear. I've gone on to a lot of detail on that. If you look upon your breath as something to be trained, and are really fierce on your breath, come back again, you get very tense, and the breath disappears really quickly. And I've said that before, that sometimes I could watch the breath and it would wander off again and keep bringing it back, and it would wander off again, keep bringing it back. And I did that for 4 or 5 years. Until you say, this is wrong, it's not working. And so instead, you started becoming wise. Why can't I watch my breath? It should be one of the simplest things in the world. Isn't it? Sit there for an hour just watching your breath come in and breath go out. Why not? And then I thought, maybe it's because my breath is scared of me. And every time I watch it, it runs away. And that's basically the truth of the matter. I've been so unkind and trying to train my breath, I changed my whole attitude and looked upon my breath as being my friend. Like the rest of your mind, look upon my body as being a friend. Not something I train and own, but something which I care for. That's what you do with friends. You become so caring for your friends. And when it comes a good friend, they come into your house, oh, welcome, what a nice surprise, come in. Because that's what friends are like, you enjoy their company. And you don't have to hold them there. Your friends stay because they're having a wonderful time with you. And that's exactly what happened to things like the breath. You're so kind to it, the breath wanted to go somewhere, off you go. But then the breath would come back. Oh, this monk actually treats me well, so I'm going to hang out with him. Cats and dogs. Sometimes, so many people have cats, or especially cats. You find a stray cat that wanders into your home. And if you're very nice to it, of course, that cat will stay. It likes kind people. There was that story about a lady, someone sent me this story from a newspaper cutting. This lady in the United States was coming back from the shopping mall with all the groceries for the weekend. And had her arms just full of bags and stuff. She managed to open the door of her house, but just kick the door open, just the key in there, kick the door open because her hands were full of groceries. And she noticed this big dog, I think it was a Labrador or something, just run past her into her house. She didn't have a dog in her house. And so, she couldn't stop it because her hands were full. She put all the groceries on the kitchen table and then went to look, where's this dog gone? Doesn't know who it is or where it is. And saw this little dog, not a big, medium-sized dog, curled up in a corner of one of her rooms. It had already fallen asleep. And she thought, that's a nice little dog. It was clean, had a collar on. So she thought, it's not a stray dog, it belongs to somebody. I don't know why it's come in my house, but it looks so cute, just curled up, asleep in one of the rooms. So she left it there and just unpacked the groceries and did some chores or whatever. And then 2 hours later, heard a little bark, a nice little bark, and the dog was at the door, so she opened the door and let it out. And it went away. And she wondered, because the dog came back the next day. She opened the door, went up to a corner of the rooms and curled up for a couple of hours, and then she let it out afterwards. And she was quite sort of charmed by the antics of this dog. What it wanted to do was come in the house, curl up, and then go to sleep, and then go out again afterwards. But like most people, you wondered, where does this dog come from? Why does it come into my house? So she got this wonderful, intuitive idea. She wrote on a piece of paper like this, this dog, I don't know its name, comes into my house every afternoon about this time for 2 hours. It sleeps in a quiet corner, and then it leaves again. It's not my dog, but it's nice and clean. It's got good nature, and what's this dog's name? Where does it live? And why does it come to my house? And then she folded up the piece of paper and put it under the dog's collar. And the dog went away. The following day it came back for its sleep, had a new piece of paper in its collar. The answer, the dog post. And the answer was, he said, this is my dog. We live just a couple of blocks away. And in my house, there's myself, my wife, about 5 kids. And it's just so noisy. And the kids are always pestering that dog, young children. And that's actually, I can understand why the dog has come to your house for a bit of peace and quiet. Can I come too? Said the owner. You can understand just even like animals, just they want some kindness, not sort of training. And that, or actually call it training, that's that allowing unwholesome states like getting very tired and noisy kids always on top of you, patting you, playing with you. Oh, come on. I need a bit of a break, says the dog. So anyway, that's where he went to. So the dog will wander off if you don't treat it kindly. You treat it kindly and the dog will always be there for you. So that's the same with the mind. Treat the mind kindly. And then you will find the role of the Samavayam, the 6th factor of the Eightfold Path, is fulfilled. Unwholesome qualities just don't arise in your mind. And if they do, for some reason, they disappear very quickly. And good ones arise in the mind. Joyful ones. Like I hope they've aroused. They've come up in your mind on this retreat. Beautiful states of mind. You don't feel guilty about yourself. You don't think you're frustrated. You have some happiness and joy and peace. If so, it's working. There was a time I indulged in watching porn. It left much negative energy, negative karma imprint. You've got to be very careful here because you have got your registration form, so I can check the handwriting. He. Now I want to repent, or in Buddhist terms, lessen the negative imprints. In Christianity, they had Jesus' blood to wash away the sin. Crikey. It's pretty intense. Sometimes you need a lot of Jesus' blood. You don't want mine, I hope. No, you can't have my blood. Take the knife. No, it's very simple, because even you can't get somebody else to forgive you for anything you've done. All anyone else can do is just to inspire you to forgive yourself. You did the act. You did the forgiveness. You don't need some higher power to do that. In fact, a higher power can't. We're not judges in a court of law, and you sort of ask forgiveness. Because especially with the moral failures, you did it, and it's in you. And it's you who punish yourself. And it's you who can forgive yourself. And again, that was, the marvelous part. There's no punishment in Buddhism. So basically, there's nothing to forgive. But nevertheless, you can forgive yourself. And if you forgive yourself and you realize, I just made a stupid mistake, but you learn from it. You learn, why did I do that in the first place? And try and reduce or take away the causes which made you do sort of wrong actions. And that's all. At the end of the retreat, sometimes we do a forgiveness ceremony. But those of you who've been on my retreats before know that I always adapt the forgiveness ceremony in what I thought was a very wonderful way. Now you ask forgiveness for anything you've done by body, speech or mind, intentional or unintentional, in other words by accident sometimes, which might have hurt anybody, or have upset them, or made their life a little bit more difficult than it could have been. And also you ask forgiveness for anything you didn't do which you shouldn't have done, intentional or unintentional. And then of course, I give that forgiveness on behalf of everybody for you. But the thing which I always change in the usual forgiveness ceremony is to add, I give you forgiveness for anything you've ever done by body, speech or mind in the 3 time zones. For everything you've ever done in the past, as far back as you can remember, for all you're doing now. And most importantly, I forgive you for everything you're going to do in the future, through thousands of future lives. You're already pre-forgiven. So you never have to bother me by asking forgiveness again. You don't need it. You're totally forgiven. That's what kindness does. You're human beings, and that's what human beings do. They make mistakes. They say silly things sometimes, but I find it funny. So you don't get upset. You just, please say some more stupid things so I can use them in my talks. So that's forgiveness in the 3 time zones. And so forgive yourself in the 3 time zones. And it doesn't make you slack. It just makes you feel good about yourself. So you don't need those, attachments and obsessions anymore. How to keep a silent mind when my job involves intellectual work? My job involves intellectual work. I have to answer all your questions. Is that right? I don't know. I am very attached to my thinking. My sense of self is bound up with it. I even notice I have anxiety when I don't think or make myself not follow the urge of thinking. I tried using will to stop thinking for years, and it would work for even a few years, but then it always collapses, And then I get angry with teachers simply telling me not to think. Please help. Thank you. No, thank you. It is true, it's an addiction which we have. And I think I mentioned too, I trace the addiction to thinking back to our school system. Because I do recall several times, primary school, Peter, what do you think about that? I said, nothing. And they thought I was stupid. You weren't stupid. What was that? Okay, great story. I haven't told this one yet on this retreat. This was in Thailand, northeast Thailand, that basically everyone had to do 4 years of school. Grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, grade 4. And that was about it for most people. Ajahn only did 4 years at school. And then there was this one kid, and he went into grade 1 with everybody else the same age, all his friends in the village. But he was just so different that after 1 year, the teacher said, look, with the best will in the world, I cannot pass you. You have to repeat grade 1. And I just couldn't understand, how do you have to repeat the first year in primary school? Is it, you can't use crayons? Or what do you actually learn in grade 1? Nothing much. But anyway, he had to repeat grade 1 when all his friends went into grade 2. It's very humiliating. And after another year in grade 1, the teacher had to fail him again. Couldn't pass him up. He was not ready to go to grade 2. So I gave him one more year in grade 1. And he said, look, nothing I can do with him. He's really stupid or dumb. That's why I thought he was dumb, stupid. So what do you do with a boy after 3 years in grade 1? And in northeast Thailand, it's obvious. They send him to a monastery to become a novice monk. But not all novice monks started like that. So they sent him to the village monastery, and in the village monastery you had to learn some chanting, and you just couldn't learn chanting. Not even a simple chanting. I'd make this up myself because they just said he didn't learn chanting, but to make it clear just how difficult it was for him, even something like Namo Tassa Bhagavato. He could, after a lot of time, the abbot at that monastery made him learn Namo, and then Tassa. So after another month or two, he could do Tassa. What was that first word again? And so after a year or two, even the very kind abbot of this village monastery just gave up on him. So what do they do with a young boy who can't go to school and he can't sort of learn any chanting? They sent him to the forest monastery, like Dhammasara. It's a forest monastery. But what happened to this young monk, a novice monk, when he went to this forest monastery? He didn't have to learn chanting. He didn't have to just study sutras and stuff. What he needed to do was to meditate. So they gave this little novice monk simple meditation instructions, and it was the easiest thing in the world for him. He soon got into incredibly deep meditations, and he became an enlightened being. And I forget what his name was now, I wish I could remember. But anyway, that when he did have to do some ceremonies, which monks have to do from time to time, what he did was, it's a little bit of a trick. He couldn't learn chanting in this life because he basically didn't think. He was just so peaceful, but fully enlightened. So he could actually recall a previous life of his when he was a monk. In that previous life, he'd learned the chanting perfectly. And that's how he chanted in this life. And he'd just channel in from his previous life how he'd learned the chants into this life, and he'd just chant everything. And that's really quite cool. But what's really cool, that he was so dumb and stupid by school standards, but like a potential enlightened being, they never noticed. And when he went to the monasteries, he flourished. And I often think that teacher kept on saying, Ajahn Brahm, you're stupid, you don't think. I could have, you could have made so much faster progress if you didn't go to that school. Because it's true. We think too much. I think everybody will agree with that. And all the great thinkers, and I've met many people who are supposed to be great thinkers, and they're not impressive at all. Great feelers, emotional geniuses, and that's very impressive. But people who are great meditators. That's why when you go and see an Ajahn Chah, because said in places like Cambridge, you can sometimes hang out with some Nobel laureates. That's really impressive. But then you hang out with an Ajahn Chah, and hands down, he's much wiser. And that really challenged me. How can these monks only finished grade 4 be so much more intelligent and wise and sensitive to life. Because the power of their meditation, the stillness of their mind, the wisdom born of stillness. So that's why, but if you've got a job and you have to use your mind thinking, use your mind thinking. But when you get home or come to a temple, rest your brain in silence. You can do both, two different skills. It's not that hard, once you know your mind, to be able to be still when it's time to be still, and to think when it's time to think. But even at work, you find that some of the stillness which you develop gives you the edge over your other workers in that company. Even, what is it? I remember reading this article again, that as meditation became more common in places like California, that if on your CV, and you send this off to your potential employer, that you can prove that you meditate regularly, that's a huge advantage in being selected for employment, because they know you can handle stress. That's why when I went to places like Google and Facebook, many meditators there, they were encouraged to meditate. It gave you an advantage in your abilities at work. And of course you all know that. You're more innovative, you'll be more collaborative. When somebody else is talking to you, you can actually really listen. And you can actually get more work done in less time, more in the moment, instead of worrying what you're going to do when you go home afterwards. Anyway, do you think people from small towns are more spiritual than those living in big concrete cities? No, I don't think. You said, do you think people? No, there's some really, really spiritual people in both places. Well, I don't really know. Ajahn Brahm, can you please give some instructions to keep practice meditation at home? You're not at home yet, are you? Live in the present moment. Oh, actually, no, I was wrong there. Please give some instructions to keep the practice tradition at home. You are home. This is your home. Jhana growth. Don't, whenever you come here, those who've been here many times, don't you feel that this is coming home? You come in here, you get your room, and after a day or two, you just love it here. And you just, this is more home than that place which you call your address. So please make a difference between your home and your address. And then you can keep the spiritual traditions going when you come home again for your next retreat. What is the best suited meditation for beginners to start with? It's the same meditation for everyone. Present moment awareness, silence, and kindness. Time for some real ghost stories. It's not until just we finish off the last question, if you want a real ghost story. Do you want one? Okay, anyway. The fourth nun hasn't been introduced. That's true. Are there four nuns? Or just three? I think the fourth one is a ghost, isn't it? 1, 2, 3. Where's the fourth one? Did she really exist? Shh, don't spoil it. Yes, in the back there. Okay. Can you tell some similes from the suttas, the Buddha's words? Much credit. I could. But if it's a real Buddha's words, it has to be in Pali. Then you wouldn't understand if there are stories in Pali, would you? You ask for some real Buddhist stories from the suttas, the Buddha's words. Oh, come on, give me a break, laugh a little bit. Okay, let's introduce the fourth nun. Okay, fourth nun. What's your name? Nun number 4. That's it. Yeah. Because a Padma, a lotus, is born in the mud. That's the Buddha's simile, because you ask for a Buddha's simile. The lotus is born in the mud. So where were you born? Yeah, it's pretty muddy. Very good. And I understand you can speak Thai. No, more than that. Because didn't your brother become a monk?
Yes, my brother
Yeah. Very good. It's amazing some of the stories. One of the monks, because I was in Thailand for so many years, and just one day this young man came. He was English. He just finished his psychology degree, I think at London University. I think in, what was it, which college? Anyway, and after he finished his degree, that he wanted to do a bit of traveling. And he had a friend of a friend of a friend who was importing horses to Singapore, to race. And they had to go on aircraft, obviously, because the boats took way too long. And it cost a lot of money, but it's a lot of money in that racing industry. And you had to, by law, have, I think, 3 grooms on the flight in case the horse, was a bit sort of upset. So they always needed somebody knew how to a horse, and to go as a groom on the flight to Singapore, free flight to Singapore. And it's very unlikely the horse would be spooked or anything, so they had a nice trip over there, like a free ticket to Singapore, and then just to work his way slowly back to Perth. And, not to Perth, sorry, to London. But he never got back. Well, he did eventually get back to London. But what happened when he got to Singapore, just see the sights and just be like any other tourist backpacker, and then up to Bangkok, see the sights there. And in Bangkok, he met these couple of doctors who were working for Save the Children Fund, and they were the ones who were looking after the refugee camp in Ubon Ratchathani in the northeast of Thailand. And they got quite friendly with him, and he said, well, I'm free, I'm just on an adventure. So I said, why don't you come up here with us, and you can see the refugee camp and just stay a few days with us. So off he went, this fellow, his name was Jeremy. And he went up to northeast Thailand to visit his friends who were working in the refugee camp, and he got quite bored after a couple of days. I said, and what else is up here in this part of the world? I said, oh, there is this monastery where there's a few Westerners, you can speak English there. And this man, Jeremy, he wasn't a Buddhist, he was a psychologist. I said, okay, I'll go and have a look. So he came there, and I was there when he came, Jeremy. And then he liked it so much, he just asked, is it okay if I spend the night here? So the abbot at the time, his name was Prabhakara, I was Prabhakara's second monk then. And so the monk said, yeah, sure, you can stay the night. So set him up in a nice room. And then the following morning, Jeremy appeared in front of the abbot, having shaved his own head, or the hair off, asking, you want to become a Buddhist monk? Which was weird, because he had no idea what Buddhism was. And which was incredible inspiration. And so the abbot, in those days, you didn't have to do the Yanagarika training, but I think he was a novice for a while, before he became a full monk. And I helped teach him. And we gave him the monastic name, Amaro. And I think many of you know, he's now the abbot of Amawati. And that's how we started out, having no knowledge at all about Buddhism, and just basically falling in to Wat Nana chart. Just know, how did that happen? But it's not even only that, because I was doing the visas for everybody, and his first name was Jeremy. And if anyone wants to know his nickname, because Ajahn Chah could not say Jeremy, the closest Thai name was Jerebi, Naman Jerebi, axle grease. So that he became known as Venerable Axle Grease. That was his nickname. So anyway, he became a senior monk eventually. But his surname was Horner. It's Jeremy Horner was his name. And it's only one other Horner I knew, which was, for those of you who've ever done any Buddhist learning, was a Professor I.B. Horner. She was at Cambridge, but she was the head of the Pali Text Society, spending all her life translating books from Pali into English. And I asked him, I said, are you any relation to I.B. Horner? He said, no, I never heard of her. But then, when he went, about after 4 years or something, his father had a heart attack, so he went back to look after his dad. And his dad survived. But then he asked his father, Professor I.B. Horner, is there any relation of ours? His father's face changed. That's my sister, your auntie, the black sheep of the family. It just wasn't done to study Pali at Cambridge. And had kept that secret from him all his life. And when he became a monk, he found out his auntie was this famous translator, which, many of the old books which we use for Vinaya, and for Dhamma, were translated by her. Amazing. Just the amazing karma connections. And now he's the abbot of Amawati. That's where he belongs, Amaro at Amawati. Interesting story, some of where monks come from, and where nuns come from too. One of the, can I say this? Oh yeah, why not? One of the lovely things about Padma, about a lotus, I made the 1,000-petal lotus, opening you up to see what's inside, is the other thing about a lotus, is very famous simile of the Buddha, was that whatever you pour on a lotus doesn't stick to it. Its petals are such that it rejects everything. Water just falls off it. And I always encourage people to remember that, because if somebody is passing by and they urinate on the lotus, now that's not a suggestion. You don't do what I say anyway, so that's fair enough. Then all the urine just falls off. and afterwards the lotus just smells like a pure lotus like it did before. And the opposite of that is somebody pours like perfume over the lotus, Chanel number 5. Then that all falls off the lotus and nothing sticks to it, nothing remains, it doesn't keep anything. But afterwards it still smells like the lotus. And that's a simile of praise and blame. Some say you're the most wonderful nun in the world, they're pouring Chanel number 5 over you. Afterwards it just falls off and you keep none of the praise afterwards. You're just the same as you were before. And if somebody urinates on you, again, or they criticize you and to blame you for something, again, just you don't keep anything. And afterwards you're the same old Padma as you were before. That's a very beautiful simile because you get praise and blame no matter what you do in this life. And always remember, you're like a lotus. You keep none of it. It all falls off. It's another form of letting go. And talking about your peeing on things, where has the lovely cow gone? We had a cow here, and it just, it actually came from Karna Prison Farm, we found out, and it was wandering around here, they'd escaped. And it's really weird why they come to Buddhist monasteries when they escape. I think they've got a bit of wisdom there. So anyway, it was staying here for a while, and I think Christina was looking after it, but it's not the right place. A cow needs a lot of attention. So I think it went to, did it go to McDonald's? No, it didn't. No, we found a place where it was like a sanctuary for animals who were wandering in the forest who had escaped, so they could live happily and be well fed and protected. And that's where it went. It was a very, very timid cow when it first came. It was very big and quite frightening for many people. But when people cared for it, it became just really nice and soft. So if you want to know more details about that, ask Christina, because it was arranged for the cow to go there. Dear Ajahn, what is the will that you talked about this morning? Is it the choice? Can you please explain the Eightfold Path? It's the will, yes. The will is choice, what decides to do things. It's the power which drives you. People always talk about free will. There's no such thing. Our will is so conditioned. That's one of the reasons why I give talks and why questions and answers, which is another form of talk, so I can brainwash you. Changing your will. What was that story about? There was this monk who just started off a new temple, and it was very hard to, because we don't charge for anything. It's all done by donation. So this monk, he wasn't getting enough donations, so he had to pay the bills. So he went to another monk, a senior monk, and just asked him, how do you manage to get such a nice temple and pay the bills? He said, very simple. When I was a young monk like you, I would give like sermons, maybe on a Saturday or Sunday night or something. But then at the end of the sermon, actually even before the end of the sermon, I'd make sure before the sermon I'd close all the windows to make it stuffy. And I'd turn up the heaters to make it really warm. And I'd give a very boring talk, which he was very good at doing. And when you give a boring talk in a stuffy room, which is hot, soon people start to fall asleep. And just before they fall asleep, I get out my watch and backwards and forwards until people are all hypnotized. To hypnotize people, you've got to speak in a soft voice and just increase the number of S's which you do with a soft voice until people are just so under your power without them realizing it. And anyway, he said, then get out your watch, and as you are doing your watch, once they're hypnotized, tell them, look, we need donations. No coins. No $5 or $10 or 20s, only 50s or 100s. And this man, I can't do that. I said, of course you can. It's encouraging people to make good karma. So he tried it out. It worked. He made a lot of money that evening. But he decided to make sure he didn't do it every evening, otherwise they'd soon suss him out and bust him. So I waited for a few weeks until he needed a bit of cash. Did the same, closed all the windows, turned up the heating, gave a boring sermon, and about to fall asleep, got the watch out, and about to get hypnotized, and that's when he dropped his watch. You know, when I said this once at the Katina ceremony, Ajahn Jhana, he knew what the punchline was, and he just took the plug out of my microphone. Do you remember him doing that? Anyone who was there at the time? Yeah, but he did that, but it didn't stop me. But as the watch dropped on the floor, just the young monk couldn't help himself. He just swore, "Oh shit." And that's what the people did. It is not the way to raise funds. That's what the will is. Oh yeah. Explain the Eightfold Path. If anyone's really interested, Ajahn Brahmali is starting an in-depth explanation of the Eightfold Path, starting in February, 24th of February, isn't it? 20th of February, yeah. You know better than I do, crikey. And so it's online, it's at Nolamara Centre, and a few people are helping him, a few great scholars. Yeah. So that's wonderful. So who's helping him? Is it only just you? Okay, there's two scholars. And anyway, so you can get the details there, because it's getting late. Please explain how merit works. How is it calculated? Who's keeping the score, etc.? Remember, all the things you say and do, all on the... So we know how much merit you're making. Are you making enough? No, just merit is just the word for good karma. And one of the things which, again, one of the words of the Buddha, he actually, in one of his sermons, he said, monks and nuns, you should make good karma too. And I always thought that karma was what the lay people did. But no, monks, you make good karma too. Serve, be kind, be generous. And hopefully you've seen me doing my best to be kind and be generous to each one of you. Even though maybe you're not on the list for the interviews, I'll still try my very best if I possibly can to give you that interview. And to spend extra time, not just 10 minutes. And do the very best I can, because that's my service. And I just know automatically, if I give extra, then I get so much happiness and joy. My meditation lifts up. So merit is not just for your next life, it's in this life as well. You can see just how that your giving, sacrifice, helping, is lessening your ego, lessening your will. It's not what you want to do, it's what needs to be done. And that means you're just meditating gets so much happiness and joy. So that's one of the things which merit is. You get its rewards in this life. And simple things, people always think, oh, merit is making donations. They're important too, but one of the best ways of giving is forgiving. Somebody has upset you, or they've irritated you. They keep banging their doors on every night. Just they get up so early in the morning, they get up at 4 o'clock. I know you're supposed to get up at 4 o'clock, but they're just not you. You want to get up at 5 o'clock. They were just these smart Alex, always getting up so early. But whatever it is, give forgiveness. It's a beautiful type of giving, of dana. And that means it's a meritorious to forgive people. You feel so much wonderful after you've done that. So that's another type of making merit. And who's keeping the score, etc.? Your mind keeps the score. And the weird thing is, and this actually explains some of what I've said to you before about how to let go of the bad stuff of the past, is when you do an act, it's not just one for one. If you hurt somebody else, you get hurt back many times. If you're kind to somebody else, you get kindness back many times. It's like it multiplies. Which means when I read that, I thought, oh my goodness, all the bad things which I've done in my past, they've been multiplied so many times. Oh, I'm never going to be able to pay that one off. Your bad karma is immense. But then so is your good karma as well. Your merits are huge. When you get your head around that, you say, wow, why is it that I get the results of bad karma sometimes? Because you've got a negative mind and you just draw in that inexhaustible, I'm saying this, inexhaustible amount of bad karma you've accumulated over many lives. But when your mind is inspired, powerful, loving kindness, generosity, forgiveness, whatever, you're drawing in from your store of good karma. And you're happy and healthy. And you've got energy. So that's one of the reasons why, especially when you get really sick and about to die, just please, you've got inexhaustible amounts of good karma. Please draw that good karma in. And you can die really beautifully and peacefully and just, whoa, that was a good death. You keep the score, no one else. Last but one question. Firstly, thank you for your kindness. Secondly, sometimes before I meditate, feeling and thoughts of apprehension or anxiety come up about not being able to sit for long, or that it will be too hard. I imagine your answer would be to show them who's boss. And only joking, but I think kindness and mindfulness is the answer, but I'd love to hear you speak about it. Now, sometimes about how long you're supposed to sit and giving yourself goals, that's all just worrying about the future. And I really don't like that, because sometimes I remember just when I started meditating, just really concerned about how long I sit for. 20 minutes, was my maximum. That's too short. I'm going to push for 30 minutes. And that really hurt. Okay, let's go for 40 minutes now. And that was just excruciating. Until after a while, because I had faith in my teacher, don't worry how long you sit. It's not the length of sitting, it's the quality of it. So I didn't worry about how long I was sitting. And then because you were more concerned with the quality of it, then you got some really nice quality meditations, and you opened your eyes, it was an hour and a half. How on earth did that happen? You're fully aware, really alert, but the quality was so wonderful, it was natural you sit long, because you're enjoying it. So this is one of the things, don't worry about the time, worry about the quality of your meditation. And you find that's always in the present moment. You give it lots of kindness, and then you are fine. So the last question. Time for some real ghost stories. You want some? Okay, this is a real event. Again, this is our monastery in the northeast of Thailand, years and years and years ago. Because it was a cremation ground. Oh, Leha, could you sort of dim the lights, please? No, okay. You've got to have atmosphere for your custom. Ooh. Okay. So, it was many people were cremated in that monastery at Wat Nana Chat. And there was a cremation this one day on a full moon day. And that was in the morning time. In the evening, we'd have to spend all night meditating, just in the hall. And that was okay. As I said, I'd had experience of ghosts as a student, just investigating them, understanding them, getting some facts about ghosts. So I wasn't scared of ghosts. But anyway, this Thai people, as you know, they have all these ghost movies. And it's not real, but they just embellish the movie to make it scary. And that's what people get conditioned to be afraid of ghosts. And I've already told you that when I told people I wasn't afraid of ghosts, they thought that was weird. And I couldn't really explain to them because I investigated them as a scientist. So instead, what I told people a few days ago, I told Thai people I'm not afraid of ghosts because I can't understand Thai language. So whatever the ghost says, I don't know what the heck they're talking about. But anyway, I could understand some Thai. But in this place, there was a little novice, maybe 10 or 11 years of age. He was in our monastery staying for a short while. And when he was staying there, he had to join in everything, the chanting and the talk of the evening. And then we start meditating. And normally, about 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, he'd slip off and go back to his hut and take a rest. We all knew that. We let it happen. He's only a 10, 11-year-old. He's not like a big monk. So he would always slip off. But that night, because there had been a cremation only about 10 meters in front of the hall that night, he was terrified of going out. A fresh ghost. So he was sitting in there long, and he never sat before, maybe midnight, I'm not sure. But then his problem was that he had to go to the toilet. And the toilet was out in the forest. And he was really holding himself as the fear of getting attacked by the ghost against the pain in his bladder. And so in the end, he just had no choice. He left the hall and ran to the toilets. Those old squat toilets they have in Asia. He ran to the toilet, locked the door, squatted down on the toilet pan to relieve himself. And he told us his story, and it was an honest story. He'd only been inside the toilet for about 1 minute, and he heard something walk up to the door. The toilet was in, it's a wooden door. And having walked up to the door, then he could hear it scratching at his door. It kept scratching. And he really evacuated a lot of his toilet business. And he stayed in there from about 12 o'clock till about 5, when it got light again. When he finally came out of the toilet, it was only a small cubicle. And he came out and said, "Look, I was so close to being attacked by the ghost. The ghost came to me, and I'm not lying. I didn't imagine it. It was real. I could hear it walking up to the door and scratching on the door, and it was terrifying." A real ghost story. But he survived. Okay, for those of you who don't know, that was the civet cats living in the forest. We'd always leave the doors, open, and in a little bowl. That's where the civet cat could get a drink of water from. So all the little civet cat was doing, we've seen it many times, but the novice hadn't seen it. All the civet cat was doing, a small cat about this big, a wild cat. No, very docile, never dangerous at all. All it was doing was just trying to get a drink. So the novice, all you need to do is just open the door, give it a bowl of water for the civet cat, and they'll lock the door again. We explained that to the novice, but no, that was a ghost. So that's one true ghost story. But another ghost story, and you all know my ghost stories, there's only a few I have, was of the Australian lady who went to England on holiday. And many people who go to UK on holiday, they go and visit. First of all, there was this other ghost story. This guy, Australian guy, he went into one of these English pubs. You've ever noticed the English pubs always have low roofs? When he went into the pub, he ordered a beer. It was the summertime. But he was really surprised there was hardly anyone in the pub, actually just the bartender and him. And he sat down at a table by himself. There's no one close to him. He started drinking his beer, and he heard somebody say, "It's a nice hat you got on, sir, nice hat." He looked around. Who said that? He couldn't see anybody. And of course, when you hear really supernatural stuff, many people think they're just imagining it. So he had another sip of beer, and he heard it say again, "Nice pair of shoes, sir, nice pair of shoes." He's really getting concerned. This is weird. He looked around. There's no one there. There's no loudspeakers under the table or under the seat or anywhere. And he said, "What's going on?" So he had another sip of beer, and then he heard it the third time. "A very nice jacket you've got, sir. Very good jacket. Very, very appropriate." And at that, he got so scared, he left his beer on the table and ran out. And as he was running out next to the bartender, I said, "What's happened, sir? What's wrong?" And the visitor just said, "Look, I was just sitting by myself, minding my own business. I heard these sounds, and there's no one there." And that's when the bartender explained. He said, "That was the peanuts. They're complimentary." Ha ha ha. You've all heard that one before, but it's a good one. Okay, the last one. If you haven't heard this one before. And this was the lady. And of course, if you're going to UK, you always go and see the castles. Because you don't have old monuments like 800, 900-year-old castles in places like Australia. So I went to one of these castles and had to get a guide to show her down through the dungeons. And in those dungeons, these terrible things happen to people. Tortured and killed and kept for years sometimes. It was one of the spookiest places she'd ever been through in her life. When she trod on the boards, the floorboards, they all creaked. When she passed the open windows, and when they opened any doors, thank you, man. And it would make anybody a bit sort of scared. So when she got out up the top again in the open air, she was so relieved. But she couldn't help but ask the tour guide, "Be honest with me, sir. Are there any ghosts in this castle?" And the guide said, "In all the years I've lived in this castle, I've never seen a ghost, not one." That really relieved her, but she had to carry on saying something. What she said next, she wished she'd never asked. "How many years have you been living in this castle?" He said, "Over 300. But honestly, the real ghost stories are never very scary because they're always kind ghosts. They look after you. There was one story of this man and this lady in an elderly people's accommodation. So they had a room next to one another. And of course you make friends. And she would sometimes cook for him. And he would sometimes fix up things for her. So they became very close together. And then, they talked about their life. But then one day he died. And she was so concerned that he'd said to her he had, like I think, a son over in UK somewhere. But there was no record of her telephone number or address. And she thought she'd let her friend down by not asking about the telephone number or the address. But now she couldn't find it. There's no way of telling the son over in UK that the dad had died. She felt bad about that. But anyway, the next night, she went to sleep as normal. And she woke up in the middle of the night, and she said that somebody was stroking her cheek. And she was scared. She thought that someone had come into her room to assault her. She really sort of woke up someone stroking her cheek. So she turned on the light. There was no one in the room. But there was like a folded piece of tissue paper, which she'd always put next to her bed on the table at night time before going to sleep. She saw that piece of paper lift up and fall on the floor. There's no wind. And she said she picked up that piece of paper, she opened it, there were some numbers on it. She knew what those numbers were. She had a telephone next to her bed, and so she called those numbers, and it was her friend's son in UK. A wonderful true story. Not scary at all. The ghost had understood that, that it's something he never told, his best friend at that time. And he wanted to let his son know that he passed away. So how ghosts write on pieces of tissue paper, we don't know. But that's what communicated to this woman, so she could do her duties and tell the son that the father had passed away. There's many stories like that. They're just gorgeous, beautiful stories. It's the last, it's 9:30. Just a very quick story. I think I've told you this many times before, but it was, again, beautiful. The woman who told me this story personally over in Nolamara Center, she was just so happy of this event. That's why she wanted to tell me and share it with people. That her husband had died a long time ago, so she was living alone with her dog. The dog was like her best friend. And they'd always go out in the morning for walks and back again in the evenings for another walk. And one day, while she was playing with the dog in the forest next to her house, she dropped her finger ring. And she told me it wasn't expensive or valuable, monetary, but it had a lot of emotional connection with her. So she spent a couple of hours looking for it in the forest, but no way she could find the finger ring. So she gave it up for lost. And she stopped thinking about it altogether a couple of days later, because that's when her dog died. And anyone who's had a dog, and the dog dies, it's just like losing a member of your family. But she did I don't know what, burial or cremation. But after the dog died, she insisted, she was keeping 5 precepts. She said that she could hear a dog in the house. Because if it's your dog, the dogs bark. And it's not some other dog, you're not imagining it. She heard it in the house, but she could never see it. It was always in some other room, and she'd rush to that room, open the door, nothing was there. And as soon as she opened the door, the barking would always stop. And that was for the next couple of days, and it was quite frustrating. She'd hear it many times. Open the door, and nothing there. He said the last time she heard the dog bark, she was right in front of the front door of her house. She could hear the dog barking outside the front door, maybe only a foot away from her. So she thought, at last she can find that dog, or see it. And she opened the door very quickly, no dog there, but in the very middle of the welcome mat was her ring, which she'd lost in the forest a few days before. That's what the dog did, found her ring for her, and she never heard the dog again. The dog just telling that, stood around looking after you, I found your ring for you, now I have to go. Those are beautiful ghost stories. Sorry they're not scary. Only the ones you make up are scary. That was a made-up one about 300 years. I've been working in this castle. Because real ghosts are always very benign. And sometimes they're very kind to you. I think I told you, I did tell a story about the doctor in Johor Bahru. Did I? Oh no, okay, that was, I don't mind saying his name, he wouldn't mind this. He's basically the head Buddhist layperson, in Johor. That's just on the other side of the strait, they call it the straits, but anyway, the other side from Singapore, southernmost part of Malaysia. But anyway, he was a doctor, and he was in the old hospital in Johor, in JB, and actually that's where, it's very old, built by the British before the Second World War, and he was doing an operation in that hospital, and then, just like any doctor, a scalpel nurse, he reached behind him and the nurse gave him a scalpel, and he was making the incision, and then he realized the nurse was in front of him and no one was behind him. It was a ghost gave him the scalpel. And he said he wasn't scared at all. It's nice having a bit more help than just one nurse in front of him. Anyone working in those situations would understand. So that all the ghost stories I have, the true ones, the ghosts are always very benign. Okay, can I have some light now, please? You still there? Yay! So hopefully that takes away some of the scary ideas of ghosts and spirits. They're usually really, really nice and very helpful. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Hee hee hee. Okay, I wish you a very pleasant night.